The wind came off the prairie in long, lonely sighs that morning, bending the golden grass in waves like a memory returning. The Holt Ranch sat in the quiet middle of it all, no fences visible from the dirt road, just the leaning barn, weathered house, and smoke twisting slow from the chimney. A man stood outside with his hat tipped forward, boots planted wide, watching the silhouette that approached like it didn't know if it had the right to. She came walking with her boots slung over one shoulder, bare feet dusted red by the road. A satchel swung at her hip, the strap mended twice, and a braid of chestnut hair hung heavy down her back. She kept her eyes low. There was no saddle, no wagon, no name offered. Jedediah Holt didn't speak. He never did first. Just looked. The girl stopped a few paces away, her breath not yet caught, hands wrapped around the strap of her satchel like it held the last of her belonging. Then, soft as linen left too long in the sun, she said, "I don't talk much, mister, but I can cook." He squinted into her face. She couldn't have been more than 22. Maybe younger. Hunger was in the shape of her cheeks, and something older still lived behind her eyes, something he recognized. "Kitchen's cold," he said finally. "If you're lying." "I don't lie," she replied. He nodded once. "You're hired." She followed him up the porch steps like someone walking into a dream they didn't trust. The screen door squealed. Inside, the hearth sat empty, the dining table untouched but dusty with time. She didn't ask where to sleep. She didn't look for comfort. She walked straight to the kitchen and set her bag down. The first morning, the smell of fresh biscuits and smoked pork roused Jed before dawn. He sat at the table and watched as she moved, measured, clean, quiet. Her hands, though young, bore the calluses of long work. She didn't glance at him once. Just placed the plate in front of him and turned back toward the stove. When he looked up again, she was already gone from the room. By noon, Boyd and Amos, the two ranch hands, arrived for their usual break, muttering about stray cattle and broken fence wire. They stopped cold at the scent in the air, and the plate of buttered cornbread left waiting. "Who's this?" Amos asked, thumb hooked in his belt. Jed kept chewing. "New cook." "She got a name?" Jed shrugged. "Didn't ask." Outside the mercantile that afternoon, Miss Laverne leaned over her cane-backed chair and muttered loud enough for half the town to hear. "Jed Holt's taken in some strange girl. Walked in off the prairie like a ghost with shoes off. No people, no papers, just a face too pretty for kitchen smoke. That ain't nothing good." Back at the ranch, Clara, he'd overheard her hum her name once while scrubbing the skillet, moved through the house like a shadow. She swept the dust from corners no one had noticed in years, mended a curtain that flapped wrong, cleaned out the hearth, and started a fire that brought back the smell of something warm, like old memory. Still, she never sat with them to eat. She served. She cleared. Then she disappeared into the small back room she'd claimed for her own. That night, Jed stared into his cup longer than usual. The taste in his mouth was more than coffee. It was the return of something lost and half forgotten. For 5 years, since Mary passed, the house had sat as still as the grave, bread dry, rooms quiet, time stalled. Now something shifted. But he didn't know yet if it was good or bad. Just that it moved. One morning, she burned the bread. A storm had come through, loud with thunder, and she'd flinched hard enough to spill the batter. By the time she recovered, the oven smoked and the crust had blackened. She stood outside the back door holding the pan like it was a failed offering. The dogs whined nearby, unsure of the tension. Jed saw her from the barn. He didn't go to her, just watched. The next day, on the table where she usually found his emptied plate, lay a new loaf pan. Beside it, a square note in heavy handwriting. "Try again. Fire don't know shame." She stared at the note a long time, fingers brushing the corner like it might disappear. That afternoon, the bread came out perfect. She left a slice on his desk with a sliver of peach jam and a single word written in flour across the counter. "Thanks." He didn't reply, but the next day she found a jar of her favorite dried lavender sitting on her windowsill. In silence, they built something that resembled rhythm. She ironed his shirts, never asked if they were needed. He repaired the broken latch on her door, left a pair of stitched gloves on the bench without explanation. She spoke little. He never asked her to. Still, he noticed her starting to hum while she worked, soft and broken, like someone remembering they had a voice. But not everyone wanted her voice remembered. One Sunday, she walked with him to town, her idea. She wore a dress he hadn't seen before, one she must have mended from scraps, with blue thread that caught in the light. As they passed the church steps, Miss Laverne narrowed her painted eyes. "Well, you do clean up, don't you?" she said, lips curled like overcooked pie crust. Funny thing, a quiet girl getting cozy on Holt land. Clara kept walking. But her knuckles had gone white on the basket she carried. That night, she didn't come to supper. Jed found the plate cold on the porch and the curtains drawn tight in her room. He stood outside her door for a moment, hands shoved deep in his pockets. He didn't knock. Just let the silence stretch. From inside, her voice drifted soft as dusk. "I don't care what they say. I just don't want to be chased off again." His voice was rougher than usual when he answered. "You're not." A pause. "I'll rise early," she said. "Start the biscuits again." That was all. The door stayed closed. The next morning, the kitchen was already warm. Biscuits flaked. Coffee was strong. And when Jed sat down to eat, she stood nearby, not leaving. Her hands were folded, nervous. But she didn't run. He nodded to the empty chair across from him. She hesitated. Then, slowly, Clara May sat. The prairie outside stretched wide and unspoken. But at the table, the hush wasn't loneliness anymore. It was waiting for what might come next. The heat came sudden, dry and crackling, days after Clara took her seat at the table like it belonged to her. July skies burned pale and unforgiving, and the winds changed in ways that spoke of trouble before anyone saw the smoke. Jed smelled it first, ash and pine resin curling faint on the morning breeze. He stood from the porch, eyes scanning the distant ridge. The sky was too still, the air too hot. Something was coming. By midday, the smoke was no longer a whisper but a wall crawling up from the south, black and wild, devouring the tree line near Dobbins Creek. The fire moved fast, carried on wind like judgment. Jed shouted orders to Boyd and Amos, telling them to drive the herd west and cut a trench near the barn. Clara, hearing the panic, left her bread dough mid-rise and ran barefoot into the yard. She caught his arm, her face streaked with flour and worry. "What do I do?" He met her eyes, the weight of years pressing down in that moment. "Keep the house safe. Pack what you can. Don't wait for me if it gets close." She nodded, though her lip trembled. Then he was gone, swallowed by smoke and distance, his figure disappearing between the barns. Inside, the house groaned with heat. Clara moved quickly but with care, wrapping up Jed's mother's quilt, tucking his late wife's locket into her pocket, and placing a pot of beans to cool on the cellar steps. But her eyes kept drifting to the horizon. The sun burned through the haze like a bleeding coin. Minutes passed like hours. Then she heard it, the snap of wood, the roar of wind twisting fire into walls. The barn crackled loud, like it was calling out for help. And then a sound sharper than all the rest, a voice hoarse and pained. Clara bolted from the porch, apron flapping behind her like wings. Smoke clawed at her throat, heat pressing against her chest. The barn stood half-lit in orange glow, and beside its far wall, pinned beneath a timber beam, lay Jed. He was trying to move, blood on his forehead, coughing. "Get out," he rasped. "Too late." She didn't speak. She never wasted words when actions would do. She ran to him, ignoring the burn of cinders underfoot, and gripped the beam. It didn't budge. Her hands were slick with sweat, her breath shallow. She tried again, planting her feet, straining with all she had. It shifted. Another try, a guttural cry pulled from somewhere deep and primal. With one final heave, the beam tipped and rolled. Jed groaned, crawling free as she pulled his arm over her shoulder. They staggered out into the scorched yard, both coughing, stumbling toward the pump. She turned the handle with trembling arms, and cold water gushed over their skin. He dropped to his knees, chest heaving, eyes locked on her like seeing her for the first time. "I told you to go," he wheezed. "And I didn't," she said simply. They sat there in the mud, ash settling like snow around them, the barn behind them collapsing in a hiss of embers and smoke. Neither spoke. There was no need. Later, when the worst of the fire passed and the ranch hands returned with singed hats and red eyes, the barn was lost but the house untouched. Boyd called it a miracle. Amos said it was madness. Jed said nothing. He just kept looking at Clara. That night, after the ground cooled and the wind died down, Clara stood by the hearth, her hands still blackened, her face pale. Jed stepped into the room slowly, his limp just visible now. "You saved my life," he said. She shrugged. "You'd have done the same." He didn't answer right away. Then, carefully, he stepped closer and held something out to her, a tin mug. Not just any mug. The one his wife used every winter for tea, the one he hadn't let anyone touch for 5 years. She took it, her fingers brushing his. "I reckon this house has room for more than one ghost," he said. Clara looked up, her eyes damp but unafraid. "Then maybe we can be something else." He smiled, not wide, not loud, but real. And in that moment the distance between them was gone. In the days that followed, rebuilding began. The barn would take time, but the land was still there, the cattle safe, and the sun still rose over the same hills. Clara cooked each morning like she was pouring herself into the meal. Jed fixed the broken door on her room, then stopped fixing things and simply knocked when he needed to see her. They never made a grand speech about what was happening. It lived in the space between their silences, in the shared glances, in the way she folded his shirts now and left little herbs from the garden tucked inside, in how he started carving a new dining table, wide enough for more. Word got around. Miss Laverne tried to stir the pot again, saying things about shame and appearances, but no one much listened now. The fire had burned away more than timber. It had scorched the lies, the judgment, and what was left standing was truer than before. Clara began humming again as she worked. The old hymnals she remembered from her childhood days came out soft, blending with the sizzle of pans and the creak of the house returning to life. She didn't flinch when thunder rolled anymore. And sometimes, when the nights were quiet, she sat beside Jed on the porch, the two of them watching the stars in companionable stillness. One evening, as the fire crackled and shadows danced across the room, Clara turned to him. "You never did ask me where I came from," she said. Jed shook his head. "Don't need to." She smiled. "I think I like it here." He reached for her hand, not boldly, not urgently, just gently, as though it had been waiting for years to happen. "I think I like you here," he said. The wind picked up again, soft this time, carrying the scent of flower and cedar. And for the first time in a long while, everything felt exactly where it should be. Out on the porch, the chair beside Jed rocked slow and steady, the old rhythm of a life rebuilt not through grand declarations, but through second chances, steady hands, and the simple, enduring grace of being chosen, without needing to speak a word. And somewhere deep in the soil of that ranch, something new was growing. Not just roots or crops, but hope, quiet and strong. The kind that didn't need proving. Only time.